The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia Memory Plus. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia Memory Plus has 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that have been proven to help boost memory.
CocoVia Memory Plus is backed by 4 clinical trials that demonstrate improvement in 3 different aspects of memory: long-term memory, spatial memory, and word recall. The studies show improved brain function in just 8 weeks.
You can try the benefits of CocoVia Memory Plus with a 25% discount off your first month. Use the code PEOPLES25. To get the full benefits, take it daily for 8 weeks. CocoVia is offering People's Pharmacy podcast listeners a 10% discount on subscriptions. That code is PEOPLES10. Learn more at cocovia.com. Do you have difficulty hearing? You're not alone. 1 in 8 Americans, 30 million people, have measurable hearing loss. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
You might imagine that only old people have trouble hearing, but many young people are also experiencing some hearing loss. That may have something to do with listening to music at high volume through earbuds or headphones.
There's been a revolution in hearing aid technology. Devices are smaller and more sophisticated.
The FDA is in the process of developing regulations for over-the-counter hearing aids. When will they become widely available? Will they be affordable?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, new technologies for overcoming hearing loss.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, the FDA stirred up tremendous controversy earlier this week when it approved a new drug to treat Alzheimer's disease. Aducanumab will be sold under the brand name Aduhelm. It's being presented as the first drug to alter the disease process because it reduces the accumulation of beta-amyloid plaque in the brain. A panel of outside experts recommended against FDA approval. None of them thought the drug should be approved. Usually, the FDA follows the advice of its advisory committees. This time, however, it ignored the advice. The committee found that there was not adequate evidence of clinical benefit. Neither aducanumab nor any of the similar drugs that have been developed over the last decade have been shown to slow cognitive decline in a meaningful way. People in the trial had an advantage of just 0.39 points on an 18-point cognitive scale if they were taking a high dose of the drug. Those taking a lower dose were no different from placebo in their test results.
Many neuroscientists are skeptical that amyloid is the underlying cause of Alzheimer's disease. Instead, it may be a symptom of brain inflammation or an infectious disease process. Reducing amyloid in the brain with this monoclonal antibody may not actually alter the underlying deterioration. Side effects of the drug are worrisome. Some people develop brain swelling. This could lead to headaches, dizziness, disorientation, and falls. Patients will need to undergo brain imaging designed to detect brain swelling. Another drawback is the cost. Biogen is planning to charge $56,000 a year. Costs for individual patients will vary depending upon insurance coverage.
How important is sleep in the process of developing Alzheimer's disease? A new study reveals that brain activity during deep sleep can help clear away toxic proteins in the brain. Researchers recruited 118 volunteers with mild cognitive impairment, significant memory concerns, or Alzheimer's disease. People with better flow of cerebrospinal fluid out of the brain during non-dreaming sleep had lower levels of beta-amyloid. Those with Alzheimer's disease and those with serious memory problems had less movement of the fluid during sleep. This study suggests that the body has a natural means of lowering beta-amyloid accumulation in the brain. It also highlights the importance of good quality sleep for maintaining brain health.
Some people complained about having to wear masks in public during the pandemic last year. There's new evidence to support the practice, though. An Axios Ipsos poll starting in March of 2020 showed that only 11% of those who reported always wearing masks whenever they left home tested positive for COVID-19. On the other hand, 23% of those who rarely or never wore masks tested positive. The poll also reported that 12% of those who maintained at least a 6-foot distance from others tested positive for COVID, compared to 20% of people who were less careful about social distancing. Although masks and social distancing are far from foolproof, they do appear to offer some protection against the transmission of SARS-CoV-2. For those who are not vaccinated, more transmissible variants pose a significant risk, since many unvaccinated individuals are not wearing masks.
Hypertension is a leading contributor to heart attacks and strokes. Dr. Sevlon recognized that calcium, magnesium, and potassium play an important role in regulating blood pressure. Now, a study reveals that zinc appears to cause a pronounced and unexpected decrease in blood pressure in mouse models. This mineral works through transient receptor potential channels called TRPA1 and TRPV1 to regulate the flow of calcium in smooth muscle. This helps relax blood vessels and lower blood pressure. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. There was a time when hearing loss was considered an older person's problem. Those were the days before people had private listening devices and could crank up the volume. Now, even young people may have some difficulty hearing. Noise pollution is everywhere. Leaf blowers, lawn mowers, vacuum cleaners, and even hair dryers are loud, and loud noises can damage hearing. According to the National Institutes of Health, 1 in 8 people in the U.S. have hearing loss. That adds up to about 30 million people.
What can we do to help people hear better? To find out, we turn to Barbara Kelly, Executive Director of the Hearing Loss Association of America.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Barbara Kelly.
Hi, Terry and Joe. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. You know, this is personal for me. I have to admit that I've been suffering from hearing loss for probably 25 years. And Barbara, I still don't have a device. So I'm hoping you'll be able to help me and many of our listeners, because I understand hearing loss is really, really common.
Well, it is, Joe. In fact, you are not alone. There are 48 million people in the United States with hearing loss, and that's about 1 in 7. And that covers all different levels of hearing loss, from mild hearing loss that might just be a little bit of a nuisance to profound deafness. But it's not uncommon. We hear from people who know they have a hearing loss, but it takes about 5 to 7 years before somebody does something about it. And honestly, we encourage people not to wait, because hearing health is so much a part of good overall health.
Barbara, how can you tell if you have hearing loss? There are times when Joe, as he has mentioned, doesn't hear what I've said, or he misinterprets what I said. But there are other times when I say something to him and he's not looking at me and he doesn't realize he's missed it altogether.
Mm-hmm. Terry, you're right there with a lot of other people. Hearing loss is different for everybody. And sometimes, I don't know, Joe, if you can relate to this, but do you ever feel like you can hear something but you can't understand? And especially if you're listening to something on TV or on the computer, and you just can't get quite an understanding of all the words.
Well, I'll tell you when it's really a problem, and that is when there is other noise in the background. So if Terry's talking to me and the radio is on, I'm going to have some challenge. Now, if you add to that in the kitchen the dishwasher or the dryer, oh boy, now I'm in real trouble because there's just too many competing sounds, and I'm almost assuredly going to miss a lot.
That's right, Joe. And that is another common problem is background noise. And that is a sign of hearing loss. Other signs that people might ask themselves, do you have trouble hearing on the phone? Are you turning up the volume on the television or the radio, or problems with background noise? So that is a common problem. And you're right, it's all those competing noises that make it really hard. So just a communication tip that you and Terry could do at home is make sure, Terry, when you need to talk to Joe, is get his attention and make sure that there's no background noise going on. And he's probably going to have to focus on your lips or, not have that background noise.
Well, I'll tell you the other place, and it hasn't been a problem for over a year, and that's a restaurant. Because, the pandemic has kind of made it challenging, but soon we'll be going back to restaurants. We'll be in places where there are lots of sounds and voices. And boy, in a restaurant, if I can catch 1 out of 3 words, I'm lucky.
I know. And restaurants, I found, are designed nowadays to be noisy because I think they think that there's an element of fun associated with noise and racket and the high ceilings and the sounds bouncing off of hard floors. And again, a restaurant is almost an impossible place to hear. Here in the DC area where I'm located, the local Washington Post restaurant reviewer, Tom Siesma, actually runs a decibel level with a noise meter when he reviews all the restaurants. And I just think this is absolutely brilliant.
That is really helpful. I remember at least twice when we were thinking that we would eat out in the before times, stepped into the restaurant and said, this will not work. Neither one of us will be able to hear anything.
Right.
And then just left.
And then just left, and they lost your business, right?
Right. Now, I do have a question, Barbara. There must be several different causes of hearing loss. Do we deal with them in different ways? And how many different causes are there?
Well, there are many causes of hearing loss, and one of the most preventable causes is noise-induced hearing loss. And it's totally preventable, and it's completely irresistible. So hearing protection is really important, and even at a young age. And we know that our kids are listening with earbuds, and basically, if you can hear the sound coming through the earbud from somebody else, that sound is too loud. So hearing protection is really important. Some of the causes of hearing loss are unknown. People might have a sudden hearing loss and never really get to the bottom of it. Some hearing loss is caused by ototoxic medications, meaning that it's harmful to the ear. There are some cancer drugs, cisplatin being one of them, that causes hearing loss. There are some very strong antibiotics. So I would recommend that anybody going on a medication is ask your physician, are there ototoxic side effects? And some drugs like aspirin, I believe, and I'm not a physician, but I believe that if taken in high doses, it will cause hearing loss, but then when you stop taking it, the hearing comes back. Other causes could be genetic. Other causes could be, a doctor will say to you, hearing loss is part of aging. And that's what I really want to caution against. And although it really is, I would say 1 in 3 people between the ages of 65 and 74 have a hearing loss, and nearly half of those older than 75 have difficulty. I really caution people that if you go to your physician and you say, I have a hearing loss, if your physician says, oh, it's part of aging, don't worry about it, there's nothing you can do about it, like you get arthritis, you get hearing loss, really, don't take that for an answer. Continue on, get your hearing checked, get evaluated, and see what you can do, because there are comorbidities with untreated hearing loss. They are falls, and that's the number one emergency room visit for older people. If you have a hearing loss, you're going to take yourself out of social situations, isolation, loneliness, anxiety, depression. And now there is a cognitive link between untreated hearing loss and dementia. There's not enough research now for cause and effect, but the Lancet has published and Johns Hopkins Medicine has published that there is an association. So if anything people can take away from today is, if you think you have your hearing loss, go get it checked. And if your first line of defense is your physician or your primary care provider, and they say, it's part of aging, there's nothing you can do about it, learn to live with it, do not take that for an answer. Get your hearing checked.
Now, Barbara, I do want to go back to your message about aspirin, because as a pharmacologist, I am especially interested in drugs that affect the hearing. Aspirin can cause tinnitus, that ringing in the ears, which can also impact your hearing, but so can ibuprofen and naproxen and all of the nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So I encourage people who complain about tinnitus to think, well, what medicines are you taking on a regular basis? And is this absolutely essential? And in some cases, like aspirin for cardiovascular disease prevention, it may be essential, but it's definitely worth talking to someone who really understands how these drugs do affect hearing. I did want to ask you one question. We think of hearing loss as an older person's problem. But what about teens? What about young adults? Are they beginning to experience hearing loss because of noise pollution?
They are. And I just talked with a young man last week. It just has to be the saddest story I've ever heard, and I thought I've heard it all. He's a young man about to enter college, and he and his dad were going on a great father-son bonding trip out west, and it was a hunting trip. And neither one of them are hunters, but they thought this would be a great thing to do. And as they were going up to the mountain, the young man said, oh, I forgot my hearing protection. And everybody in the group said, oh, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. And, he kind of felt like he should really go get it. Well, the group prevailed and the trip continued. And it was the first shot of the gun rifle that, for lack of a better word, blew his hearing out and also caused tinnitus and vertigo. So his father cut the trip short. They flew back home. They went and saw an otolaryngologist, which is an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and basically nothing could be done. And the young man came home. He told me he put his head on the kitchen table and put it down, and he realized his life had changed forever. He's coming out of that. He's learning to pick up the pieces, but he said to me, he said, I'm watching all my friends go on with their life. They're going on to college. They're having their first loves. And he said, I'm just stuck. And that was a completely preventable hearing loss.
You're listening to Barbara Kelly. She's the executive director of the Hearing Loss Association of America.
After the break, we'll talk about the cost of hearing aids.
Nowadays, with people using earbuds for their devices, there's less stigma to wearing something in your ear.
What's the status of FDA regulation on over-the-counter hearing aids? What's taking so darn long?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's Kaya Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYA Biotics.com.
Also by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com.
Our topic today is overcoming hearing loss. Have you ever struggled to follow a conversation in a noisy restaurant? Some people have found that it's hard to hear what's happening on Zoom, especially if the internet connection is less than perfect.
What can you do if you don't hear as well as you'd like to? Do you need hearing assistance? Can you afford hearing aids? They may not be as expensive as they once were, and there may be a few other options.
To learn more, we're talking with Barbara Kelly, Executive Director of the Hearing Loss Association of America.
Barbara, the story that you just shared strikes very close to home because I experienced something very similar, probably about 25 or more years ago, an accident at the radio station where the sound in my headphone was just off the charts, like a jet plane taking off in my ear. So I understand, and I've suffered tinnitus ever since. But I do have a question for you, and it's a very practical question. You know, I think a lot of people would seriously consider hearing aids or devices for enhancing their hearing, but they hear about the cost, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 per hearing aid, no help from insurance. And they basically say, I just can't afford $6,000 for, the latest and greatest hearing device. And I keep hearing that there's going to be a change, that one of these days there are going to be over-the-counter high-quality hearing aids. And I'm sure a lot of people are seeing ads for somewhat similar devices on their, social media because there's advertising all over the place. So can you give us some sense of what's going on in the world of assisted hearing and what we should be looking for, and will we ever be able to get high-quality devices at a fair or reasonable price?
Sure. Joe, the total cost of hearing aids can vary depending on the features of the device and services provided by a hearing healthcare professional. The price of one hearing aid can range from less than $1,000, and it can go all the way up to $6,000, although a top level probably more is like $4,000. But the technology accounts for about 1/3 of the total cost, and that's of the device, while the remaining would include the services, the initial consultation, evaluating, fitting, ear molds, testing, adjustments, and so forth. Technology is exploding. And I like to say, who could have dreamed that we could hold in the palm of our hand our phones, our television, our computer, and our smartphones. Now, in 2017, there was a new law called the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act of 2017. And what it does is it directs the FDA to open up a new category of over-the-counter hearing devices. And this will kind of what you say you're talking about is allow people with mild to moderate hearing loss, and only adults, we're not talking children, adults with mild to moderate hearing loss to have devices sold over the counter. And this market hasn't opened up yet because we're waiting for the FDA to put out some proposed rules. And then when these proposed rules come out, we'll all be looking at them. And, our organization will be submitting comments like to make sure they're safe and there's return policies and proper labeling and things like that. But there are products on the market now, but they are not considered over-the-counter hearing aids, and they're not marketed for hearing loss. And they're called PSAPs, which are personal sound amplification products. And you might have seen these advertised like in a magazine, but they don't market them to people with hearing loss. They market them to say you can hear your prey in the woods if you're a hunter, or you can overhear the conversation on the park bench. And I have to tell you, there's some very good devices out there that when the over-the-counter market opens up, they probably will cross over and be allowed to be marketed as an over-the-counter hearing aid. Now, of course, there's a lot of junk out there. And if you see something for $19.99, that's, probably what you're going to get. But another alternative, and I just want to make it clear that I'm not a spokesperson for Costco, but right now at Costco, which, is a large retailer, they recently introduced their Kirkland Signature Model 10, and it has connectivity, it has streaming, it has a telecoil, which is very important for connecting to assistive technology in, say, a theater. It has a rechargeable battery, and they are $13.99 a pair. So I'm not a spokesperson for Costco, but I'm trying to just make the point that there are some affordable options out there. And some insurance plans do cover hearing aids. And while Medicare does not cover hearing aids, and that's a whole other topic we could go into, Medicare Advantage, many of the insurance programs on Medicare Advantage cover hearing aids. And for some reason, people don't realize it. So if people have Medicare Advantage, I recommend that they look a little deeper into that.
So, Barbara, you say that there are some relatively inexpensive personal sound amplification products that actually are good. Can you share any brand names with us?
No, I can't.
Okay.
I really can't. But, I know some that.
Is there a resource where someone could go online and find an evaluation that would tell them which ones are good and which ones are not?
And there is not a resource. That's the problem. And I think once this over-the-counter market opens up, there will be more resources. And there's a lot of customer confusion right now, and I can understand why. I will say that Bose just came out last week that they are marketing a hearing device over the counter in some states, and they received a de novo exemption from the FDA to be able to do this. There's also some PSAPs out there that people should just try if you have a mild to moderate hearing loss. They're typically earbuds, and that you program them with your cell phone, like the Bose unit. So you can raise the volume on your smartphone, you can reduce the background noise. And I just want to say, because my husband's in this category, he likes to say that he needs a little hearing enhancement from time to time. If he's in a meeting, in a conference room at work, he uses these earbuds and adjusts them on his cell phone. So maybe people don't need a solution for 24/7, but they need some situational hearing enhancement. And what this over-the-counter market will do, and I hope will do, that it will encourage people to take that first step into better hearing health. There's definitely a little stigma involved, but if these, go ahead, Joe.
But you know what, Barbara?
Yes.
There used to be a stigma because anything that was in your ear made it look like, oh, you're an old fogey and you've got a hearing problem. But now that teenagers and everybody in between has, earbuds that they're listening to their music on or they're doing interviews with, it's like, well, everybody has something in their ear these days, or almost everybody. And it's not quite as much of a stigma as it used to be.
I agree. And it's great. It is great. And 10,000 people turn 65 every day in the United States. And this is, I don't want to leave out the younger generation because they certainly have to pay attention to hearing health. But people are staying in the workplace longer. They might retire, but there's usually another career down the road, or there's some life activity that they want to stay involved in. And hearing health is so important. And I think this generation wants to stay fit, active, engaged. They want to stay vital. And that means that you probably have to take care of your hearing health. And I think in that regard, people are willing to do anything to be able to live well and be healthy. And I think we're in a new day and age for that. And I'm excited that I think we know more about the detrimental effects of untreated hearing loss and how important it is to overall health. And I think this is probably a good day and age to treat your hearing loss.
Barbara, you mentioned the legislation in 2017. What was it called again?
It was called the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act of 2017.
Now, here it is, 2021. And I keep hearing any day now, any week now, any month now, the Food and Drug Administration is going to issue rules, guidelines, regulations, something to guide the manufacturers of hearing-assisted devices, and it'll kind of give the public this opportunity. What's taking the FDA so darn long?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, Joe. They have 3 years from the time that the law is passed to publish these proposed rules, and they are past the deadline. The deadline was passed August. And nobody really knows. It could be COVID. It's just takes a long time. It could be held up in the general counsel's office. And, I just want them to get it right. So if they need this extra time to get it right, but we're all anxiously awaiting these proposed rules so we can all make comments, they can make the final rules, and we can see some products.
Barbara, what should somebody do if they have just occasional trouble hearing?
Well, first of all, they should get their hearing tested, get a complete diagnostic evaluation, and then see what the options are. Any good hearing healthcare provider will do a needs assessment. They'll ask questions. When do you have trouble hearing? When do you need to hear the most? Do you go to work? Are you in an office? Are you in a labor industry? And really, do some person-centered care and get to the bottom of what the person needs.
And I have to tell you, Barbara, your website is fabulous. Hearingloss.org is a fabulous website and gives people a tremendous amount of very practical, useful information. But one last question. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in this field.
My Aunt Manel wore hearing aids. She was a speechwriter for the Marine Corps Commandant in the Public Affairs Office here in Washington, D.C. And like many, her hearing loss was progressive, and it was getting very frustrating to work. She told the Commandant one day, I have to retire. She was only about 50. She said, I can't do this anymore because of my hearing loss. He said, you will not retire. You are worth more to me if you're totally deaf than 5 hearing people. So she continued on but the hearing loss progressed, and she really retired in defeat, not knowing that there were things that could help. This is before the Americans with Disabilities Act, that she could ask for accommodations in the workplace. And I was visiting her in Washington, D.C. I just moved here, and she asked me if I would go to a chapter meeting with her of the Hearing Loss Association of America. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And I went with her to this meeting. They had a hearing loop where she switched a switch on her hearing aid that got her direct audio input so she could hear the speaker. There were lots of professional people in the same boat as she was. And I thought, this is the aunt that I knew and loved. She's herself again. She's engaging. She's being social. She wasn't sitting at a family gathering in the corner reading a newspaper because it was just too hard to communicate. And family members can be the worst. They found her very hard to communicate with, so they just would give up. So that was my introduction to our organization. And I met our founder, who is Rocky Stone, who retired from the CIA. He was an operative. He was chief of station in Rome. And he functioned as an operative with a hearing loss and a big body aid for many years, reading lips. And when he retired, and people in government service often retire early from those careers, he went looking for an organization that was not for people who were totally deaf and used sign language, but somebody who knew about when you're between those two worlds. You're not fully hearing, but you're not totally deaf. And you're living in, the hearing world, but you need technology, you need information, you need support. And I loved the philosophy of the organization. It was give people all the good, unbiased information you can give them and let them make their own decisions about what they need to live well with hearing loss. So that's my story. I'm now the executive director, but for many years I was editor of our magazine and director of communications. And I feel that there was a whole lexicon that needed to be built up around this topic. And, I'm very pleased that I could be part of that. And I could see major pieces of legislation being passed over the years.
Barbara Kelly, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It is my pleasure, Terry and Joe. And Joe, I encourage you to go out and take that first step and get something that might help you out when you need it.
You've been listening to Barbara Kelly. She's the executive director of the Hearing Loss Association of America and the primary spokesperson for the organization. You can find it online at www.hearingloss.org.
In just a moment, we'll talk with Dr. Stephanie Schaublad of the Division of Speech and Hearing Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's clinical director for the UNC Hearing and Communication Center and a director at large for the Academy of Doctors of Audiology. Dr. Schaublad will be able to give us the audiologist perspective on overcoming hearing loss.
After the break, we'll learn about Dr. Schaublad's own experience with hearing loss and how various technologies can help people who would like to hear better.
How do audiologists help? And how do hearing aids work?
When are personal sound amplification systems appropriate? They don't require a professional to fit and tune them. Are they similar to reading glasses for vision? Several different companies are now selling such over-the-counter products to help with hearing.
How do professionally fitted hearing devices compare to over-the-counter technology?
And where can we learn more about hearing aids?
The pandemic really highlighted hearing difficulties for some people. How should they proceed if they've noticed that masks make it harder to understand what others are saying?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This podcast is brought to you by the Verizana Health Club. This comprehensive home testing service enables you to track crucial health markers of gut health, inflammation, metabolism, hormones, thyroid function, and many other organ systems. Regular testing can help detect health imbalances before they lead to sickness. Online at Verisana, verisana.com/health-club. Get 50% off the first month with the discount code PEOPLE50. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a supplement with 750 milligrams of cocoa flavanols, plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that help support memory. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYABiotics.com.
Do you wish you could hear better? If so, you have a lot of company. Family members often get tired of repeating themselves for people with hearing loss. The good news is that technology has improved dramatically over the last decade. Hearing aids are now small and can easily be personalized for each individual. Even over-the-counter devices have a lot of customization available.
Our guest today is Dr. Stephanie Schaublad, professor in the UNC Chapel Hill Division of Speech and Hearing Sciences. She's clinic director for the UNC Hearing and Communication Center and director at large for the Academy of Doctors of Audiology.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Stephanie Schaublad.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here again. It's been a few years.
Thank you for joining us. Dr. Schaublad, you're an expert in hearing problems and in improving people's ability to hear and communicate. And you have a special interest in this topic because you've had your own experiences with hearing loss at a fairly early age. Can you tell us what happened and what you've done?
Yes, I'd be really happy to. My hearing loss started when I was born, except we didn't discover it until I was about 6 years of age. And it was discovered accidentally when my younger brother was going in for a hearing test. I am one of 3 children in my family who were born with hearing loss. Back in the 60s, when there were no services for kids like us, we got hearing aids. We had a front row seat in school, and we just did the best we could to get by. When I got to college, I actually did some research on the hearing healthcare industry for my honors thesis project, and I was really surprised to learn how few people were wearing hearing aids, even though there were so many who needed them. And that sort of started my passion to get involved in this field. Initially, I thought the message wasn't being relayed. People didn't realize hearing aids existed. Further study helped me understand there are a lot of dynamics that prevent people from getting hearing aids. I think for a long time, the stigma of accepting that someone had hearing loss was a very big barrier to people moving forward. Cost of hearing devices and hearing care, the lack of coverage from insurance, and access are other areas that have prevented people from getting involved. And my goal when I started as an audiologist was to focus on the person and what are the problems they want to solve, and not just the device, because there's no magic hearing aid. I've worn every hearing aid that exists in my lifetime. I have a cochlear implant now as well. And there is no magic hearing aid. What the audiologist does in providing care for the patient helps them to utilize other tools in the toolbox so that they can take what they hear with the technology and utilizing these other tools, do a better job of hearing what the message is. And that's what I'm trying to train our students to do, is to look at the whole patient and helping them to solve their communication difficulties.
Dr. Schaublad, I've had hearing problems for probably 20 or 30 years. Ever since I had a very loud noise in my headphones during an interview. And there's something obviously wrong with my hearing. The stereocilia hair cells in my ear is probably pretty well destroyed, and apparently they haven't grown back. Plus, I have tinnitus, ringing in the ears. It's pretty constant, comes and goes. I've learned how to accommodate to it. But what's going on is not just hearing, it's also what's happening inside my head has been a little bit damaged.
So what he's saying, I think, is we suspect it's not just the ear, it's also the brain.
Exactly. And I think what's a difficult concept for people to wrap themselves around is you can get glasses and bend light and get 20/20 vision back. So for years, people have said, oh, hearing aids don't work because it doesn't just you don't just put it on and hear magically again. And that's because the system that it's going through, those little stereocilia hair cells inside the cochlea, have either been damaged or they're beyond repair. They're gone. So when the sound goes into the system and a message gets sent to the brain, it's not all there. So the patient has to sort of fill the gaps in and try to decide, what did I hear? Or it may be a little distorted. So it's a little more like macular degeneration and glaucoma, right? You can't see well with those. Glasses don't fix it, but people find ways to go about their lives with those disorders. So similarly with hearing loss, this is where the audiologist can work with the person to help them think about strategies like choosing the best seat in the restaurant, how to ask people to rephrase, how to, just think about where you sit, think about lighting. Those are the things that help you to make the message clearer because you get visual cues in addition to what you hear. So that's going to be a challenge with the over-the-counter products. And I hope people don't throw their hands up and say, oh, they don't work. Hearing aids just don't work. It's never going to regrow those hair cells. But it's definitely a tool that's made a big difference for many, many, many people.
Dr. Schoblat, how common is hearing loss and what can be done for it?
I think people are often surprised to realize that hearing loss is one of the most common chronic health conditions. It's the number 3 chronic health condition behind hypertension and heart disease. And about 38 million Americans have hearing loss. Yet only about 8 million are wearing technology to help them resolve communication difficulties. The first step really is acknowledging when someone is not hearing well and then getting a proper diagnosis of the hearing loss so we can determine if there is something that can be medically treated with surgery, which is only about 10 to 15% of the folks. Everyone else needs to go the path with a rehabilitative audiologist and investigate looking at hearing aids and communication strategies training and maybe other assistive technology.
Dr. Schoblat, how do hearing aids work? Are they basically amplifiers? Are they all doing the same thing just to various levels? Or is there more sophistication than that?
Yeah, on some level, hearing aids are making sounds louder and delivering it to the hearing mechanism, which brings the message to the brain where it's interpreted. A properly tuned hearing aid using real ear measurements is going to be very precise. It's going to provide volume where the patient needs it and no excess volume where they don't need it. There's going to be different things compressing noise. There's going to be different arrays and microphone configurations that will help to manage the sound. But ultimately, hearing happens at the level of the brain. So the hearing aids can be very well programmed, but then it still has to be interpreted by the person with hearing loss.
Dr. Schoblat, you were just talking about quote unquote tuning or making sure that the device is working as effectively as possible. And that gets us to, I suspect, a very controversial area. Do it yourself, and there are now several devices, maybe a lot more than that on the market, and there will soon be many, many more over the counter once the FDA gets its act together, versus professional supervision, tuning, organizing, making sure it's optimally prepared for each individual. So could you give us this do-it-yourself versus professional controversy?
Yeah, and I think it is controversial for some. I don't think I'm one of the people that sees it as entirely controversial. I liken the over-the-counter devices that we are seeing. The official ones from the FDA have not arrived yet, but I liken them to readers. We want to see more people do something about their mild to moderate hearing losses sooner. So let's say these devices are readily available in the drugstore, in the big box stores, maybe even mail order. And it can be rudimentally programmed to a patient's hearing loss, or maybe they're going to try to fine tune it themselves based on loudness preferences. It's a good start. Someone then could say, well, this worked for a little while, but now I'm not quite hearing as well as I'd like. I would like to see those folks do what I would assume people did with readers. The readers are no longer good enough. Now they go see the professional. So I would like to see patients with over-the-counter devices that aren't working optimally to say, let's bring the audiologist into the picture. The audiologist, for one, our clinic could look at how well it's programmed versus what they need for their hearing loss. Sometimes just small tweaks can be made that way. Or it may be time to go to something more customized. And I think it's important to note there are entry-level hearing aids and value hearing aid products that are less than some of the prices that I've seen for over-the-counter devices.
How would you learn about that?
Well, I think the internet is where we learn everything nowadays. That's probably one of the best places.
We can't always trust it. Is there a good site?
I'm trying to think, the Hearing Loss Association of America is consumers who have hearing loss that are trying to help others that have hearing loss. I think that's a great place to get started. I think looking at university clinics is also another good place because that's where the research is coming out that talks about the importance of treating hearing loss. It's where they're training the next generation of practitioners. So I think you can trust what you see on those websites. There are professional organizations in audiology, the Academy of Doctors of Audiology, the American Academy of Audiology, the American Speech and Hearing Association. Those are professional organizations someone could look at to find more reliable information about hearing aids and the treatment process.
Good to know. Thank you.
I'm curious about the people that you've served. I'm sure that you have many stories to tell, but for our listeners who may recognize that they have mild to moderate hearing loss, what happens when they go from, what'd you say, to, oh, wow, things have changed? What's the experience like for some of your patients? I'd love to hear some stories.
I especially like to talk about the younger patients that I'm working with more nowadays. Some of the biggest comments I hear have to do with how much easier it is to listen, how much less fatigue they have at the end of the day, how much more enjoyment they have because they're catching the joke, they're hearing the punchline. And if I look at my patients who over the years have gotten hearing aids earlier, I personally see better long-term outcomes because they haven't been without sound for so long that when we reintroduce it back with hearing aids, their brain is not confused. The brain's like, oh, I know what that sound was. I used to hear that. But if they wait 7 years from when they first start having difficulties to doing something, it takes a lot more work for the brain to learn to reorganize itself and make meaning of those sounds. It's pretty exciting. Even very slight hearing losses, those folks are saying, years ago, we told them, no, we can't help you. Come back when it's bad enough. Now we listen to what they say. What are you struggling with? And what is their motivation? And if they're struggling and they're motivated, we can find solutions for them. And it's a very rewarding feeling.
Dr. Schoblat, I'd like to ask you about hearing during the pandemic. It seems like this pandemic has posed challenges on multiple fronts, but I'm imagining that people with hearing loss have had specific problems with other people wearing masks because it makes it harder for them to see what the lips are doing impossible, in fact, and it kind of muffles the sound that's coming out. Is there any interesting way that audiologists have helped people deal with those challenges?
Yeah, that's such a true thing. What I think has happened is the average age of our clients has dropped as a result of the mask, because people have said, oh, I didn't realize how much I was reading lips. I didn't realize how much those visual cues mattered. So getting hearing aids and having them properly tuned and going through the rehabilitative process has been one way that we've helped people. There are technologies that allow us to do some things remotely. There are technologies that their phone can be used to help program the hearing aids. And so those are some tools. We actually got very creative at figuring out how can we deliver care if the patient can't get to us.
Dr. Schoblat, we are getting close to out of time, and I'm wondering, what research are you excited about for the future?
I think one of the things I'm hoping to see at the political level is some changes with regard to how audiologists can be accessed for care. There is actually some movement in Washington with a Medicare Audiologist Access and Services Act that's going to actually work to improve Medicare-covered audiology services for Medicare Part B beneficiaries. And it's going to help patients to get coverage for some of the things that other providers actually can do, but we have to charge the patient out of pocket. So that's an exciting area for me. I think it's exciting to see what's coming in technology and all of the things that we can do outside of the devices in counseling patients, Bluetooth technology, the ways that our hearing aids integrate with everything now is just really fantastic. It's, I think, giving people optimism to get back and stay engaged and do things that they love. They're no longer saying, oh, I can't go, I can't hear well, I don't want to do that. So I'm excited that there are more choices than ever coming, and that when working with a good provider using best practice, people can continue to do all the things they want to do.
Dr. Stephanie Schoblat, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Stephanie Schoblat, Clinic Director for the UNC Hearing and Communication Center. She's a professor in the Division of Speech and Hearing Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Schoblat also serves her profession as a Director at Large for the Academy of Doctors of Audiology. She's been involved with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine as they work to find ways to make hearing care more accessible to all Americans.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits her interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Cocoa Via Memory Plus, a cocoa flavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYA Biotics.com.
Today's show is number 1261. You can find the podcast on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you go to peoplespharmacy.com, you can share your thoughts about today's show in the comments section for show 1261.
You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website on Monday morning. You might want to share it with a friend or family member.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. By subscribing to our newsletter, you'll also have regular access to our weekly podcast and find out ahead of time which topics we'll be covering.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.